this is being recorded on the live stream as well. So, all right, welcome to the monthly Desert Blockchain session for November 2020. And if I could ask you to mute if you're not speaking, I'd appreciate that. And my name is Jay Carpenter. I'm the founder of Desert Blockchain, and we have these sessions every month, usually on the fourth Wednesday of the month, but because of the holidays, we're doing it on the third Wednesday of the month at 7 p.m. So we cover a variety of topics on the decentralized web. And tonight we're going to be talking about decentralized voting innovation. And we are very fortunate to have some participants from the Arizona State University, Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law, some law students that will be presenting. We also have some other folks that might be dropping in that I'll introduce as they join us. And we have, I think, a very timely set of topics. We are over 2 weeks from the election, the current United States presidential election. And I think there's still, well, there's definitely still a lot of conversation going on. So, you know, again, I would appreciate it if you could mute unless you would like to talk. Feel free to put your questions in the chat. We do have folks joining us on the live stream, and they're welcome to post their questions in the chat as well. So unless there's any questions or comments at this point, I'll turn it over to our first presenter. And basically, no questions, no comments. Feel free to type questions in the chat and we'll get to those. So it's my pleasure to turn the session over to our first presenter, Buddy Norton, who is, and here's, I will introduce Representative Weninger here, who just joined us. So, bear with me just a moment. Okay, so when Representative Weninger joins us, he's here. Hello, Representative Weninger.
Hey there, how are you doing?
Good, delighted that you can join us. I'd like to introduce you up front so that folks know who you are and the contributions that you've created for the state of Arizona and blockchain innovation in general. Representative Weninger is the chairman of the Commerce Committee for the Arizona State House of Representatives, and he has been a champion of decentralization and blockchain and freedom of choice. And first of all, congratulations on being reelected, and I'm delighted that you're here to join us. So our first presenter is, and here is Professor Boscovic. I'll introduce him as well. So Professor Boscovic is joining us from Arizona State University, Department of Computer Science, and he heads the blockchain initiatives there for ASU. Delighted that you're with us, Professor.
Thank you very much.
And we're going to start our presentations in just a moment. We'll have 4 presentations, a few comments, and I'll invite you to make a few comments, Professor. And then we'll open it up for conversation. So our first presenter is Buddy Norton, who is a student at Arizona State University, Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law. And Buddy's going to be talking about blockchain and elections and innovation, both nationally as well as internationally. So Buddy, and you also, would you tell us a little bit about your involvement in politics and your activity with some of the parties and so forth?
Yeah, so hi, my name is Buddy Norton. I'm a 3L at the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law. And the background that I've had has mostly been on the election side of blockchain and elections. I've worked on campaigns, I've worked on campaign committees, I've worked in parties for non-campaign elements like voter protection. And so what really got me excited is, as we keep on finding out about applications for blockchain, elections seems to make a whole lot of sense. So what my presentation is going to cover is mostly the short history of blockchain elections, both in the United States and overseas. So I'll go ahead and try and share my screen here. Awesome. All right. All right. So, and if anyone has any questions as the presentation is going on, feel free to stop me. No worries there. All right. So these are the few jurisdictions that have actually utilized blockchain in public elections in the United States. This is all within the last 2 years. And in order, we got West Virginia, who used it, the Votes platform, with the help of Tusk Philanthropies, which is a mobile voting project organization started by Bradley Tusk, who I'll touch on in a minute. Then Denver, Colorado did it for their municipal elections in 2019, along with Utah County and Jackson and Umatilla counties. Utah counties in Utah, of course. Jackson and Umatilla are in Oregon. And most recently, Vermont added, and they are actually the only ones who have not used votes. So what you can see here highlighted in red is that it's only been 3 jurisdictions that have actually used it for federal races: West Virginia, Utah County, and Vermont, all of which did it. 2 of them did it in the general this year. One of them, West Virginia, planned to do it this year, but ended up switching from the Votes platform for some security concerns that came up. So why don't we get into this if no one has any questions. The history of blockchain in the US is largely the brainchild of Bradley Tusk. After he made it big off Uber, he launched Tusk Philanthropies in 2017, which has 2 wings. One of it fights hunger, and the other is the Mobile Voting Project, which approaches jurisdictions and offers to pay for pilot elections, usually involving just overseas or UOCAVA voters. And so basically every time he's partnered with an election, my bad, let me back up. Every time we've seen blockchain used in these elections, with the exception of Vermont, has been Bradley Tusk approaching a jurisdiction and then utilizing the Votes platform in order to run that election. Now, Votes was founded by 2 brothers who made the project basically for the South by Southwest hackathon and won it in 2014. They founded the company a year later, along with a lot of other so-called democracy startups that are really focused on modernizing not only our elections, but a lot of our government services and how people interact with them. Votes on its website says it's processed over 15,000 votes in 67 elections, but they keep a lot of their information close to the chest, not only because they're a young company that's still in Series A, but because every time they've opened themselves up, they get criticism that just comes along with where we are in mobile voting right now. And the worst of it happened earlier this year when a string of events led to a bunch of jurisdictions that we saw in the last slide dropping votes and going over to other platforms that don't use blockchain. But it wasn't because of the blockchain, it was because of the mobile voting issues. And those were identified first by a team of MIT researchers that had a slew of complaints about the security of the system, with a particular emphasis on how easy it would be for even non-sophisticated actors to get in there. And then shortly after that, the Department of Homeland Security published what was eventually published, was only part of the Department of Homeland Security paper, but it has also a series of complaints where if you look at the complaints, they're really basic. They're not things that are going to surprise anyone. In fact, they surprised people that they haven't already plugged those holes. So then a University of Michigan student got caught by the FBI almost hacking into the 2018 election in West Virginia. So all of this comes out. West Virginia backs off. Denver backs off. Oregon backs off. And then only Utah County says, you know, those concerns are outdated. We're a small enough election, it doesn't matter. And they move forward with it. So that's kind of the short history in the United States as far as public elections goes. But
before you go on, can I ask a real quick question?
Of course, go ahead.
I posted 3 amicus briefs for Supreme Court for the case that votes are filed. One of them from Mozilla Foundation, one from Electronic Frontier Foundation, that are all on the side of MIT researchers and not on the sides of votes. And it's not that they found some holes, it's incredibly insecure. I happen to know the researchers, and I'm almost guilty on them finding it because one of them is a good friend of mine who I've been saying blockchain, 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 blockchain. Eventually he said, Marina, I'm sick and tired. I'll take a look at it. And this is what came out. I'm glad you're a lawyer, you're at least almost a lawyer without a few months. I would love for you to explain to me why, if it's so insignificant, both Mozilla Foundation and Electronic Frontier Foundation file amicus on a side of the researchers and not on the side of the votes. And I don't know also if you know, but the auditing company from California, I forgot the name of it, did confirm that there are problems in their system.
Yeah, so I don't want 2 things. One, it's very unclear how applicable the MIT paper is to Vote's current platform. That was the #1 thing that the clerk down in Utah County brought up when she moved forward with using the Votes platform. As they said, a lot of those are outdated. It'd be very convenient for Votes to show us its platform so we could confirm that, but obviously they want to hold that information close to their chest. The second is that my personal opinion would be that Votes has very serious flaws that probably continue to today. But you know what I really want to do as far as screaming blockchain, 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 is that mobile voting is one technology, and blockchain is a separate technology. And blockchain has a whole lot of more applications in voting than just mobile voting. Which actually segues pretty good into our next slide, unless anyone else has any more questions on that.
Well, can I just throw in there that other MIT researchers have come forward and said they do think blockchain is the best alternative for voting. And so, people say MIT said this. It was 2 researchers and 2 students at MIT, but there's other faculty, including an article in Cointelegraph, saying on November 14th that this is actually the best way to do the voting, much better than anything else we have. So there's a lot of different expert opinions out there.
Can you post that link, please?
Sure.
And I don't understand what is that. Why they sued them in the Supreme Court? Why did they skip the local courts? How did they?
Marina, this is Jay. I appreciate the information you're adding, and we'll have some conversation time at the end. But if we could kind of move on, I would appreciate that.
Yeah. So. To highlight what Vermont did, Vermont has not used Votes, was not approached by Bradley Tusk. They went with the election security solutions company SICPA, which works internationally. And they basically just backed up their registration rolls onto a blockchain. Not nearly as sexy as mobile voting, but say you attack voter rolls or you have connectivity issues with your voting locations, which happens all the time in elections, this prevents that from slowing down voting or affecting the election whatsoever. So it's a very secure and workable solution, whereas mobile voting has, its own concerns, which will take separate investments to cure. So that's what I think states need to look at when they're exploring blockchain, and a lot of them are. There's active committees working on legislation. There's task forces that are active right now. More and more state parties are using this, especially in 2020. Even the Arizona Republican Party used a virtual convention utilizing blockchain this election. Election reform is obviously in the public mind, so states should take advantage of this because if you integrate blockchain into your elections, you can integrate it in different places in government, and you can also attract investment because your government's knowledgeable about it. So finally, sorry about that, to the international experience. So these 6 countries are really the leaders internationally as far as integrating blockchain into their elections. Estonia and Sweden have digital ID concepts that they link up with their registration process. Sierra Leone partnered to have their elections tabulated on a parallel blockchain to spot any fraud in the normal process. And the other jurisdictions have municipalities that have used mobile voting. There was a lot of problems in Russia, a lot of really promising things in Japan. So yeah, this is more of a breakdown of, and I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm not a Zoom expert as far as sharing my screen here. Blockchain can be used in registration, tabulation, and really the least amount in voting. You can basically only mobile vote or in-person vote electronically and actually vote using blockchain. The rest of it, you can see the policies that are good here with each of registration and tabulation. You can either just run it alongside where it doesn't have as many transaction costs and integrating it, or you can fully integrate it and get all of those security, verification, and immutability benefits. And as far as laying the platform for future developments, you could link up a registration blockchain to a death certificate or permission voting via a registration blockchain. And as far as tabulation, this is going to be key for especially mail-in states or heavy mail-in states like Arizona. A blockchain's data is only good as what you put into it. So if you're scanning paper ballots, you have to make sure that technology is good also. So I didn't want to take up too much more time, but if there's any more questions, just let me know and I'll go ahead and unshare my screen.
Great. Thank you, buddy. Great way to get it started. All right, let's turn it over to Kaylee Hoffner. And Kaylee, if you would share your screen and also let us know a little bit about your background and what got you interested in elections and blockchain and so forth.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Kaylee Hoffner. My background is in engineering. I'm also a 3L student at ASU. I have an undergraduate degree in material science engineering, then went on to study mechanical engineering. My work background is mostly in equipment engineering and robotics. I worked for the Boeing company before I came to law school. So I am heavy on that tech background and was kind of interested in finding anything I could at law school that would kind of leverage that. So I took the blockchain and cryptocurrencies class with Professor Marchant this semester. So the research I'm going to be presenting today is the research that I have conducted for that class. I chose elections just because it seemed relevant today, but I have no political experience. So take that with a grain of salt. Let me share my presentation. All right, so like I said, the research that I did today, the title of my presentation is Blockchain and Elections, a Promising Future or Threat to Democracy. So there's a lot of risks and benefits with integrating a new technology into this existing process. So I kind of take a look at elections as they stand today and some kind of arguments for and against the integration of this technology into our process. So there's concerns with the traditional voting landscape, both from a paper ballot standpoint and with electronic votes, pertaining to everything from voter identity, voter authentication, privacy, auditing uncertainties. Even with electronic voting, security concerns remain, right? Anyone with physical access to a machine could potentially sabotage it. There's more challenges with data integrity, reliability, transparency, ballot secrecy, consequences of breakdown, security, fraud, costs, just kind of a whole plethora of concerns. I mentioned a case study down here. I'm happy to send this out for anyone that might be interested in reading about it. But this was done in a county in Pennsylvania during the 2016 election. It was a very close race, like we see in much of the election results today. The winning candidate won by a margin of less than 1%. And in this county, they use an electronic voting system lacking a paper auditable trail of ballots. So this sort of process, introducing electronic voting when it's not necessarily auditable, introduces a whole number of potential attack vectors for willing and able actors for those areas we are concerned about when it comes to elections, like cybersecurity generally. So there were some recommendations as a result of this case study in integrating electronic voting. The bottom line at the end of the day is that electronic voting without an auditable trail produces a number of potential risks and weaknesses. So while the system may be convenient, it's not immune to attack like we're really looking for. So blockchain technology has been proposed as a solution to some of these current concerns with the voting process through kind of these four main features. So because the ledger exists in multiple locations, there's no one single point of failure like we might see in one machine that gets compromised with the electronic voting, like in this Pennsylvania county I mentioned. There's distributed control over who can add new transactions to the ledger. Any proposed new block to the ledger has to reference the previous version, creating that immutable chain that was discussed earlier already tonight. And then a majority of network nodes have to reach consensus before a proposed new block of entries becomes a permanent part of the ledger. So the decentralized nature of blockchain, as well as its common attributes of anonymity, transparency, really make it a viable approach to solving concerns kind of raised by electronic voting in the process as it stands today. There have been several novel designs of blockchain electronic voting systems and architectures that have been proposed in the literature. I researched for this. In some cases, there have been prototype implementations of these systems and evaluations done, but largely on a pretty small scale compared to the hundreds of millions of votes we see in, say, a national United States election. So while these studies don't necessarily guarantee that e-voting with blockchain technologies would succeed in the context of a national election, advocacy for national elections integrating the technology are still coming up because of these attributes of blockchain as a possible solution to some of the concerns that we are seeing. So some of the risks and criticisms that we see surrounding integrating this technology, I have listed on this screen. Security experts cite concerns with online voting, including server penetration attacks, possible malware on client devices. Technology might not be ready to handle the general population. Adopting new and distributed technologies requires trust in the tool and system, something the American people or citizens in general might not feel with regards to current election processes. We don't know what the recourse would necessarily be if someone lost their secret key enabling them to vote. It requires a digital platform and internet connection, which might not be accessible to all citizens that would be voting. And it doesn't exist in a vacuum. So this technology is new and it's going to require extensive personnel and technological support. So there are certainly risks with integrating this technology, including the scalability. And not to integrate too much of my own opinion into this presentation on my research, but I think that just because the technology isn't currently ready for widespread adoption doesn't necessarily mean that the development shouldn't move forward if it's deemed a viable solution to some of the risks that we see with elections. And I also am of the opinion that some of these risks I mentioned here could be addressed in the design of this architecture, which I'll touch on briefly later. Some of the benefits associated with integrating this technology are just those key characteristics of blockchain I mentioned earlier: the auditability, confidentiality, transparency, decentralization. Many of the qualities that make up the nature of what blockchain and distributed ledger technology really could help address some of the concerns and risks that we see with the current election process. It could dramatically reduce the cost of voting. There would be improved accuracy, speed of counting votes. Database administrators in a traditional election could delay voter registration and try to influence a particular outcome, but by decentralizing the voting process, it kind of helps prevent corruption in that way. Could solve delayed votes like we're seeing, because tabulation would be quicker, securely maintaining records, and ensuring that auditability and transparency. The Denver Election Division piloted mobile voting using blockchain technologies. And kind of what they found in that case study was that voter turnout had doubled from the previous election. 100% of the respondents favored this more secure mobile voting, and a third-party audit showed the results were recorded and tabulated accurately. So this was obviously done on a much smaller scale, but I think that the results were promising and positive. I think the transparency and traceability can help make election or electronic voting realistic while eliminating some of these concerns. So one of the things that we would need to look at in order to adopt blockchain voting would kind of be the key principles into the system architecture we would be trying to adopt. So I have them listed here. Trust is one of them. So it would require stakeholders be confident in the electronic voting system. This would depend on aspects like security, transparency, verifiability, other things like that. As far as transparency goes, the system should support the casting of all votes and tally of all votes by all stakeholders, as well as allow them to verify this, go back and not only confirm that their vote was counted, but that it was counted correctly, which kind of feeds into that next bullet point, verifiability. Auditability, the system should support any process that might necessitate rechecking and recounting of votes in the case of electoral disputes. If we needed a recount in a county or a state, it could be done pretty quickly and pretty accurately, which I think would have been a great thing to have in our back pocket in this election. Availability, the system has to have sufficient mechanisms in place to support the volume of votes that they'll get. Goes hand in hand with performance, non-coercion of voters. It has to minimize the risk of voters being coerced to vote in a certain way. And then socioeconomic and political factors. It shouldn't exploit the socioeconomic status of voters and try to unduly influence them in a certain way. So I kind of tried to summarize a variety of studies done in the key principles they want to build up in some sort of system that would support electronic voting with blockchain technologies. How do we do this? Sorry, this is a little bit hard to read on this screen, but I have a photo here of one exemplary embodiment of how we could integrate blockchain technology into voting. So this multi-layer approach is consisting of 4 layers. As you can see, layer 1 is the client layer, layer 2 is the application service layer, layer 3, the blockchain, and then layer 4, the data layer. So the client layer contains the various electronic devices and systems which the users interact with. So you see the e-voting nodes, which enable voter authentication and casting of votes, administrator nodes, which are used to configure blockchain network channels, assign roles to nodes of the blockchain, anything like that. Public nodes enable view-only public access of transactions of e-voting. Vote validation, which ensure authenticity of transactions in the block, and then committing nodes that validate and commit new votes to the blockchain. In the application services layer, it's a set of services that are available in the e-voting system. The level of access and controls is defined to determine which nodes access that layer. The blockchain layer is a modular blockchain architecture framework that facilitates blockchain information system solutions and supports the creation of permission blockchain networks. And then the data storage layer contains relevant databases and stores information on the profile of registered voters, political offices being contested for all of the candidates, and it's used as a basis to authenticate and authorize voters. I think 2 other key components that I'm seeing in all of the different suggested architectures are smart card technology for voter authentication. This is used to eliminate impersonation and ensure that only valid voters can vote. And then the zero knowledge protocol for voter authentication. This protocol is applied to ensure that when an authorized voter casts a vote, the blockchain knows a valid vote has been cast and nothing more. The identity and the voter's choice is not revealed, which helps protect a lot of that privacy we're concerned about. Jay will speak more on this later today. This next slide is just a picture of an exemplary process flow. So just to walk you through that real quickly. So the voter would insert a personal smart card potentially into the voting node and supply their password. Authentication and authorization is done. If successful, a digital ballot is generated. The voter submits a vote for their preferred candidate. The ballot ID is assigned through the public key and the transaction is authenticated by using the digital signature of the private key. And then the transaction is sent to all nodes and stored on the blockchain. This is really obviously a pretty boiled down, simplified version, but I think it gives a good depiction on how this system could potentially look. So in conclusion, I think that implementing blockchain technology could help decentralize the voting process and improve its transparency, accountability, accuracy, and immutability in today's elections. On the other hand, like some of the risks that I discussed earlier, skeptics express concern related to the security of electronic voting and the ability of the technology to handle a large volume of voters. I think blockchain technology has a potential to provide access to elections and make participation more flexible and traceable. However, the voting process must provide legitimacy. So it's kind of a catch-22 because we're looking to decentralize the voting process, but it would require a lot of governmental oversight and would likely be a costly and time-intensive solution. But kind of like I mentioned earlier, my personal belief is if we didn't develop technology because it was going to take a lot of time, we wouldn't really get very far as a society. And I think it can address many of the concerns we see today. So that is a quick summary of my research. If anyone has any questions.
Thanks, Kaylee. That's awesome. Really cool.
I have one question if I can.
Go ahead, Willie.
Do you really see this as applicable for people to have a unique key or a password that they will, all the different issues that have arisen in this last election, people will forget their password, they'll lose their private key. I mean, really, do you see this being used by anything other than a fingerprint or an eye scan or something you can't lose or forget?
I think that obviously that would need to be developed. I think if it was some sort of biometric sensor, as you just mentioned there, that's most likely the best solution. One of the risks I see in my research is if we actually have that physical smart card, many people probably will lose it. I don't know where my voting card is. I just know if I go to my poll location, they'll be able to pull it up. So I think it would likely either require a biometric sensor, smart cards that were maybe kept on hand at the polling location, or some sort of like duo authentication like I used to get into ASU's network where someone could reset a password if something like that were to occur. But I definitely think that for a larger scale, like we're talking national elections, it needs to be developed kind of beyond where it's at right now, to punt a little bit.
Cool. Thank you, Kaylee. Thank you, Willie. All right, let's go on to the next presentation. Lucas Minnick, if you will say a little something about to introduce yourself, why you're interested in blockchain and elections, and then make your presentation with a screen share, please.
Hi, Jay. Thanks a lot. So my name is Lucas Minnick. I'm a student at ASU Law. I actually studied filmmaking in my undergraduate at my undergraduate university. So I'm not quite as technically savvy as some might be, but I'm still very interested. I'm not exactly sure why I chose this course, but it did not disappoint me. When I enrolled, I was so enamored by different cryptocurrencies that I decided to invest a little bit of my my money, and then over the course of the semester, I got about a 25% return. So thank you, Professor Marchant. Anyway, so let me see if I can share my screen here.
We give our usual disclaimers about investments and blah, blah, blah. So your results may vary.
Is my screen coming through there?
Yes.
All right, cool. Well, anyway, this isn't an investment presentation, so let's just get to it. Let's see. All right. So I'm just going to go over some use cases for blockchain in elections. It's kind of, it was already kind of glossed over in the previous two presentations, but I'll see if I can't add something more to it. And then I'd also like to propose a sort of compromise between the two competing visions of, you know, an entirely blockchain-based election system and the traditional paper ballot system. Okay. So for the first component that all of these different blockchain election models seem to be proposing is a way of registering voters. Typically how this is done is that they provide some sort of identification like a photo ID or like a utility bill. And once the voter is deemed eligible, they'll be given a voter registration card. That's how it's done in the traditional model. Several different blockchain election implementations that I've been researching do a similar version of this. Some of them, they don't even employ blockchain at this stage. It could be done with just simply a centralized database and using traditional encryption technology, but some do employ blockchain at this stage. I feel like it does provide a certain level of a couple of advantages blockchain might add to voter registration is that whatever documents are submitted are going to be essentially immutable records sealed in time, so that if some nefarious actor were going to try and fraudulently register to vote, it might be more easy to detect later, even if that actor somehow had access to like maybe one centralized database. In a distributed system, it would be more difficult for them to alter the records. But anyway, if you are using a blockchain voter registration system, what will happen is that typically the voters will be given a unique ID, perhaps a token, or maybe an encryption key that's logged into the database that correlates with their specific vote. I think we were just talking about that, about what happens if you know, a voter loses it, but maybe we can address that somewhat here. The second stage is vote transmission. Several systems that I researched do use biometric authentication. I know Estonia isn't necessarily using blockchain, but they use that for their elections too. And that can be the form of a fingerprint, or in some cases it might be they have you take a video of yourself, you know, saying something, and then the computer matches your face with facial recognition software against the ID you had submitted. They also might request the user to, you know, submit their own password they had created or PIN at the time of voting. Anyway, once the device recognizes that this is an eligible voter, they'll transmit a token to the voting database. At this stage, I saw also several different ways of trying to preserve voter anonymity. Traditional encryption also works, where maybe the voter has a private encryption key that matches up with the public encryption key in a database. But there's also the possibility of using things like zero knowledge proofs that are employed in some cryptocurrencies like Zcash. And also you could potentially use things like mixers. If we think of these votes as like a token, like we would a cryptocurrency, like a currency like Monero, what it does is that it'll take like a ring signature, like a group of 7 or 8 different voters, and then it'll mix up their votes together and then send them to the candidates' wallets, so you don't know which vote's coming from where. So that's one way. These are kind of different ways of dealing with voter anonymity. One thing that I would like to point out, though, is that even if we employ these secret technologies, these secrecy enhancing technologies, it's not necessarily a fail-safe. I think I read some sort of article that even though Zcash doesn't employ zero knowledge proof technology, most of their users don't even fully utilize it. And then there's a company, Chain Analysis, that's able to track. They said something like 99% of the users of Zcash, even though the technology is there. So that's some food for thought anyway. Then the final stage of the election process that blockchain seems to be applicable to is the actual vote tallying and tabulation phase. This, by and large, is going to be on a blockchain if you're going to be implementing blockchain at all. And there are lots of different schools of thought on like what type of blockchain or what type of system should be employed. I saw versions that recommended a public blockchain, because then the trustlessness, the verifiability, it's easier to do that. But on the other hand, if you have a public blockchain, you also know where the nodes are, and that might open up the nodes to things like denial of service attacks, or it would just like let nefarious actors know which places to target if they're trying to do something like a 51% attack. I also saw different ways of dealing with the authentication process, like whether proof of work should be used versus proof of authority. Proof of work, if you're going to try and make a system that's completely decentralized and trustless, it might be good. You'd think it might be a good idea to allow literally anyone to become a node and then completely distribute the system. But I don't. The thing that's different between an election and, let's say, Bitcoin, for example, is that in Bitcoin, there's a tremendous monetary incentive to not be a nefarious actor. If you can somehow get about 51% of the hash power to send fraudulent Bitcoin transactions, there's also a large game theory incentive for you just to play by the rules and reap the rewards. But on the other hand, here, I'm not sure if the different officials and localities running elections would be able to put up the kind of cash that would incentivize people to play by the rules when there could be potentially upwards of hundreds of millions of dollars, or maybe even like billions of dollars on the line when you're determining who the next, for example, the president of the United States is. By and large, the more common school of thought was that if you're going to implement blockchain in an election, you'd use proof of authority, where you'd pick out different actors, like maybe public universities or different election boards. I even saw one where it was like there would be a county by county level. And these would be the certified nodes that would be allowed to verify the transaction. That would still give you quite a bit of the trustless nature, because, I mean, if you're going to corrupt the system, you'd have to take over all of these decentralized units of government, and that would still be pretty hard to do. Oh yeah, one other thing that I thought I should mention is that if one advantage of having a private or a proof of authority permissioned blockchain is that because the transactions are going to be lower, that there are going to be less nodes verifying the system, the throughput can be larger, that you can process more transactions in a shorter amount of time. So I think somebody had mentioned that what are we going to do if we're going to be tabulating upwards of 150 million votes, and what's that going to look like? Well, it would be significantly easier if we didn't have to spread that entire database across 50 million nodes as opposed to maybe just 50,000. All right, so we've kind of already went over a lot of the different advantages and disadvantages of blockchain. In theory, a blockchain is going to be completely trustless. Like the math won't lie if you do it right. You can set up zero knowledge proofs to preserve voter anonymity, and it should be an immutable ledger that can't be compromised, and it should be relatively fast and inexpensive compared to literally schlepping around paper ballots all the time and counting them. But on the other hand, it's still a nascent technology. There are bugs, and when there are bugs, it's significantly harder to fix those bugs because you have to have a consensus on the network. It's not a matter of just having the IT guy in the back to go to the one database and fix that problem. Another thing is that a lot of people, including myself in a lot of areas, don't really understand what blockchain means or what's going on. So a big component about an election is not that you only get the right result, but also that the electorate believes it. It's like the faith in the democracy that is one of the main selling points. And then one other thing is, no matter how secure the blockchain like software is, we always have the problem of insecure devices. That little anecdote that I told at the beginning of the presentation about me buying cryptocurrency, what I actually did was I went on a central exchange and I bought some cryptocurrency there, and I left it in the exchange. I didn't get a wallet, and I didn't withdraw it, and I don't know my passwords. And honestly, maybe I don't even own that cryptocurrency, and they were lying to me the whole time. And that's because I don't fundamentally understand the technology enough to use it like like somebody very familiar and like an expert would. So exactly how, a lot of these things are very, very secure, but it kind of makes you think about if a layperson doesn't understand how to use it, exactly, what benefit are they really getting out of it? Are they employing it correctly? So let's compare this with the traditional system based on paper. Everybody understands paper. People with PhDs in mechanical engineering understand paper. My grandma understands paper. We all know what that means, and it typically reflects voter intent very well. When you make a mark next to somebody's name, it has a high rate of success. Maybe sometimes there's smudges or whatnot, but there's a lot more error rate. There's a higher error rate with like machines and different things that don't put different layers between the voter and their vote. Also, the attacks aren't scalable. If perhaps a nefarious actor could get some of the ballots, but they can't get all of them so easily, and maybe a bug could in a blockchain network. So my proposal is that we take the best parts of blockchain and we take the best parts of paper ballot elections and we combine the two. Because I feel like there are some non-intuitive use cases for blockchain in a paper-based election. The first one being in terms of ballot accounting. If we had a blockchain voter registration, we could keep very tight read on who's voting and at what polling places they're voting at. Then we could put like a barcode or something on each paper ballot, and then we could cross their name off the database when they take that paper ballot. And then we could make sure that the ballots that went out are the ballots that went in, and that only the eligible voters vote. Past that point, when they leave the polling place, we could maintain a very secure chain of custody. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Walmart implementing blockchain in terms of the chain of custody. I mean, their supply chain for example, produce in response to the E. coli outbreak of romaine lettuce. Well, they were very concerned about having to throw away all of their product just because there was like maybe one very small section of their supply chain that produced problematic lettuce. So by employing blockchain, they're able to isolate problematic areas and treat them effectively. A similar rationale could be employed for transporting paper ballots. If we have RFID chips and GPS trackers on groups of ballots, we can be sure that they're leaving certain points at certain times, and we have an immutable record of those transfers. The reason why this is important or why it's valuable is because if you know with almost absolute certainty where a particular paper ballot is at a given time, you can give a very good, you can conduct a very effective risk limiting audit. And what that means is that using statistics, if you're certain of the location of the different ballots, you only need to check a small number of them to be statistically certain within a certain error threshold that the outcome of the election was correct. Like, for example, if you wanted to test a group of 64,000 ballots, I believe you'd only need to test something like 80 ballots if you knew where each ballot was precisely to be within an 8% error ratio. And that's really big news because that cuts down on the cost of manually counting and recounting the different paper ballots. And not to mention, if there was any amount of voter fraud, we'd be able to isolate the area that it occurred and find it and fix it, and maybe find the nefarious actor and bring them to justice. All right, so to wrap up, I just kind of like to leave you with this thought: is that right now, I mean, my personal opinion, I know that several people have different opinions in our chat here, that the blockchain technology might be a little bit too nascent. There might be some things that need to be worked out before we're ready to completely dive into a completely electronic blockchain-based election. But if we use blockchain to track the movement of paper ballots, we could even tokenize like a vote that represents paper ballots and create an auditing system that is so comprehensive that eventually people might be comfortable just letting go of the paper record after it's proven itself for a sufficient amount of time. I feel like the apt metaphor here is that, before when we had the US, the federal currency was introduced, people needed some sort of backing of value, like the gold standard. But after a while, the dollar was so effective that people were comfortable just letting go and having a completely fiat currency. And they didn't need that underpinning because the trust had already been established. I see like a similar route to getting to an entirely blockchain-based voting system by having the paper ballot back the blockchain-based vote, and then eventually down the line when we work out the kinks, completely letting go and transitioning to full blockchain elections in the future. All right, there's my contact information. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a comment, and of course, a lot of these are great ideas, but I see two impediments. And one is what I mentioned previously about voter identifying themselves properly and so forth, but not to start any political fights, but there's been one political party that has been extremely consistent on allowing people to vote without using identification. So all these presentations are really good for fine tuning, but the politics, I'm afraid, is going to get into the middle of this and not allow something like this to proceed.
So Willie, I'm going to take that question because I think that's a perfect segue, and I'm going to not present my presentation, but I think there's two big things that are ripe for innovation in this. And number one is the human interface, and included in the human interface is how does all this work? People trust paper. Well, who understands blockchain? Almost nobody. But number two is workable decentralized identity. And, that's kind of a thing that's coming up over and over in this conversation. So we're getting a little low on time. I would like to ask Professor Marchant if you have any comments or at this point, and then I would like to ask Professor Boscovic if he has any comments, and then I'd like to turn it over to Representative Weninger and see what your impressions are. So Professor Marchant, any comments?
Well, I just want to thank the three students for their very enlightening presentations. I think where we are on this is that, we do so much online now, including very confidential legal deals and court cases and all kinds of very confidential stuff. We're able to do those security online. And yet we have basically an 18th century system for voting. Now there is huge issues on security and so on, and going to an online or blockchain system for voting. And it's a very critical part of our democracy, obviously. So we don't want to risk it. And like so many applications of blockchain, we're really in the early days of this. And I don't think anyone's advocating we wholesale replace our voting system with a blockchain system right now. But I do think there's a lot of potential here for blockchain to provide a more secure mechanism to have online voting than our traditional online ways we do it, which are quite unsecure. And for now, I think the initial applications are sort of these niche markets, like for example, military personnel serving overseas who have a terrible time voting, even though they're out there risking their lives for our country. It's very, very hard for them to vote because there's not a lot of mailboxes out in the middle of the desert. And so allowing them to be able to vote, which they've been able to do with this type of blockchain mechanism, I think is a great first step. And we need to build on that and build the security and so on to be able to make it work. I also want to just correct what, at the beginning of the thing, we're talking about a Supreme Court case that has nothing to do with blockchain voting. That has to do with Computer Fraud and Security Act of unauthorized access to computer. It happens that one of the companies involved in blockchain voting had a position on that issue, but it doesn't have anything to do with the merits of blockchain voting. That's why it's in the Supreme Court now. It was basically a case from over a year ago.
Great, thank you. Professor Boscovic, any comments that you'd like to make at this point?
Yes, for sure, Jay. I'd like to start by really thanking students, you and Gary. This is excellent summary of what we have there right now. I also wanted just to warn really ourselves from just stating blockchain as being able to solve almost everything. I think we need to be, or to really understand that this is a actually distributed system that has protocols which enable us to verify or manage three things, and that is identity, ownership, and transactions, okay? So when we say security, and I don't want to be lecturing here because it is not really objective for this meeting, but we have really IT security that each node will have the same exposure to the threat through the attacks that we can see in really everyday IT operation. Nevertheless, we have protocols which are helping us do some other things. And we had a project, I don't think that we have much time to speak about that. Dr. Bazzi, that he's online here, we had a one-year project which we did for Dash. And as you know, they have voting system to decide how they are really going to invest their budget every month. Then we had a very specific set of the requirements, and I would just mention some of them that you should basically cater for somebody or for the voter to be either or his vote or her vote can be public or anonymous. They should be able to change their votes really at any time before the voting ends, okay? Then they need to have full confidence that what is being tallied, and tallying needs to be done real time, okay? At any point you need to know what is the status of the votes on the specific really proposal. So I'm stating this because it is important to understand what are the problems that we are trying to solve, or what are the issues that we feel that we have with the current voting system. And for each of them, we would need really to look carefully how distributed system and what are the protocols that we need to have within that system to overcome those issues. We won't be able to solve everything, nor we would be able to protect individual nodes from those ordinary IT issues that I mentioned earlier. So with that, I would close, and I would be more than happy if any one of you has interest in seeing what we have done and what we are doing on this. We would be very happy to share our results and papers that we have written.
Awesome. Well, we might actually extend this to next month as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Representative Weninger to get some of your comments and feedback and questions and so forth. And we'll go a little bit over of course, anybody who wants to drop off, go ahead. But Representative Weninger, what's your impression of what you've heard, and what are your thoughts?
Well, thanks for having me. I, like the others, very impressed with the 3 students. Good job. And some other people might tell you, I mean, I've been interested in blockchain for a few years, ran some bills, and a lot of those ideas came from meeting with Dr. Dragan and Gary Marchant students and different things, and really kind of harnessing those ideas and letting them become something else. 6 months ago, 8 months ago, people were approaching me about blockchain voting, and I was telling them that they were crazy. I mean, I'm a Republican, and Republicans, a lot of people don't understand this. That's one thing. And the other thing is they just don't trust a lot of people and they don't trust things that they don't understand. Now, as of a week ago, I think they would want maybe something like this, because they want to know the people who went in and voted in the polls. They have no way of knowing if their vote counted. And they're very frustrated by that. On the early ballots, you can track, you can see that it says that you voted and it was counted. And so people are just very, very frustrated right now. Some are just these snipe hunts and conspiracy theories, but some of them, you know, people are legitimately questioning things. Mobile voting, I do see a lot of problems with that. I understand with overseas, if you're talking about military, but we passed a law, it was my second year in the legislature, to outlaw ballot harvesting. And that was where people were going door to door, and there can be a lot of coercion in that. There can be them talking, you know, an elderly person through who maybe doesn't have all their faculties of what to fill out, and hey, we'll take your ballot. And then maybe they don't vote whoever they want to. And do they actually take that ballot all the way to the thing? And I could see some of the same coercion problems if you're doing mobile voting and somebody just has an app and people are going door to door and going in their homes and coaching them through how to vote on certain things. And I think that would really concern at least a lot of people in my party. From everything I heard nationwide, ballot harvesting really became a topic this year, and it seemed to concern most people, not just one party or the other. But there's some real interesting things here, and do you do it all at once? I don't know. I mean, yeah, a lot of you are the experts, or do you do things where people can know that their vote counted, or is there, I don't know, is there some kind of permission basis where people could actually look up and see that their vote counted and who they voted for if they opted in for that? I don't know. I liked a couple of the ideas. The slides were going kind of quick. I took photos of a few of them, but I've always been interested in this, the death certificate part. I think Buddy may have had that part on his slide. To know, I mean, there's so many people who are not taken off the rolls after they die in these different things and different locales throughout the nation. And then if all of a sudden you have what Nevada did and other locales did, where they are mailing ballots to everyone that's a registered voter, and that voter is still on the rolls, you have a very big problem there. I kind of had the same idea with unclaimed property, and do we have a mechanism that would trigger, you know, if somebody died and they had unclaimed property, that you could have, it would take, you'd probably have to do a prospective, because you couldn't go backwards and put all the unclaimed property. It would be very laborious to do that, but could you prospectively have unclaimed property that, you know, had ticklers that contacted people who had somebody you die or had unclaimed property going forward, and kind of give them that kind of a reminder. So I think those are all really good ideas. I'd love to see how we implement it. A friend of mine was elected the Maricopa County Recorder, Stephen Richer. So, you know, there could be, at the very least, if everybody can, not try to be a cliche, no pun intended, but if it could come to a consensus on something that might work, we could try to get a demonstration project or some kind of a test through the legislature approved for, or some kind of an agreement with someone to start kind of going down this road.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, you know, as an entrepreneur and somebody who does hackathons and things like that, I think the path is really to try different things and see what basically works and what doesn't work, because you don't know what's going to work until you get it in front of people and, you know, see what their reaction is. That's all part of the human interface. So thank you. Thank you, Representative Weninger. And any other comments or questions before we call it a night here? I would like to thank the students as well. Awesome presentations. I'm impressed with your depth of knowledge. And I can't imagine the time pressures that you have in law school, but to produce this depth of research, I think is very, very impressive. So our next session will be on December the 16th, Wednesday at 7 p.m. And, you know, it's kind of a recap of 2020 and what's ahead for 2021. And we might be able to incorporate some additional conversation about, you know, elections and blockchain voting, because I think this is very, very timely, very important. And I think as innovators and policymakers in Arizona and so forth and academics, we have an opportunity to maybe make some headway in this important area that's important in the United States for sure, but I would say all over the world. So, all right. Thank you very much. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if someone might have an idea of the probability that we'll be able to go full out for a blockchain election in 2024, like 1%, 99%, or whatever.
You know,
I would say,
go ahead, Marina.
well, blockchain is not ready for prime time. It's an amazing technology that has no tools whatsoever. So in order to create anything, it's like digging ditches with your fingernails. There is no shovels.
Mm-hmm.
I read an article a month ago about how the Treasury Department is working with the Finance Committee on creating standards for digital currency. And if that happens, no doubt using the blockchain, those standards are adopted by other countries for commerce exchange. That probably will be how people get comfortable with using blockchain for other things like this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we might start it off with my homeowners association and just simply take the paper out of their hands that they beat each other over the head with, and ashtrays and other implements of weapons. So that might be the toehold here. But anyway, thank you, Jim. Thanks everybody for your comments, and all the presentations, including mine, will be posted to the YouTube recording, which should be out by tomorrow or Friday. And please feel free to contact me, Jay Carpenter, all one word, at desertblockchain.com. Love to get your comments and feedback. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Jay.
And are we going to get that link in the mail?
The link will be posted on the Meetup site. So, and in fact, all the presentations are linked on the Meetup site today, and those will be opening up tomorrow. So, okay.
Thank you for
Cool.
doing